So this is Richard and Craig here with our Week 2 feedback video, and once again lots of really great learning happening this week, great conversations, and some really interesting topics have come up.
Yeah, fantastic to see a lot of their skills now being applied and the reflection on experience and questions and discussions. Great.
Yeah. So, one of the first things that's really come up is this idea about people, as they start to meditate on their breathing, quite often feel very uncomfortable, have a lot of trouble, I think, just letting it happen naturally, and people feel short of breath or somehow find it quite difficult just to let the breath happen naturally.
Yeah, it tends to be sort of more an initial experience. I think rather than just paying attention to the breath in a mindful way, we pay attention to something and then we become self-conscious about it or try and control it, try and keep the breathing sort of quiet. And so we start to fight with the breath in some way rather than just allowing the body to do what it knows how to do. Yeah. So that sort of letting it go, letting it happen, I think takes a little bit of practice.
Definitely. It's a very common experience too. We always hear this from learners in our courses. So just practicing letting it go, I think, is an important thing.
And being curious and non-judgmental about it, but just interested to notice what's happening.
Yeah.
There was the issue around curiosity, and does it sort of take a lot of effort and hard work? And I think there's a subtle distinction between curiosity in a mindful way, which is just sort of looking and being interested with just a clear and open mind. Much like a child just sort of looks with open eyes at what's going on around them, and compared to a kind of interference that comes from thinking. We look and then we overthink things and we start to have an internal dialogue with ourselves, questioning things and so on. And that's kind of a very intellectual curiosity, but it's not actually necessarily a very mindful curiosity that just comes from the looking and seeing.
So we're talking much more here about a looking rather than a thinking.
Yeah, that's right. And the insight comes, as it were, from the quiet of just looking with an open and clear mind, which is quite different to the insights that we try and get that require a lot more effort, that come from overthinking things.
Yeah. Some learners were asking about hypnosis, almost sort of wondering if some of the mindfulness meditations are a form of hypnosis or self-hypnosis. And certainly in my experience, there are some pretty big differences between mindfulness and hypnosis. I mean, they're both about directing attention, but if we look at the way the attention's directed in something like hypnosis, generally people allow their attention to wander around and to wherever it wants to go, and of course there are visualizations and certain outcomes that the people want to achieve, whereas with mindfulness meditation, really it's about directing the attention to where we want it.
And maintaining a kind of a sense of awareness, a sort of a self-awareness, and to connect with the senses and engage with the present moment rather than disconnect from it. Not using imagery, because mindfulness is not really so much about imagery as about connection through the senses to be, in the present moment. Some of the learners have spoken about being interested in retreats, and I think, in some ways, if we're a runner, if you enjoy doing a bit of distance running in the morning, somewhere along the line, the thought of running a marathon probably comes up in your mind. But you don't want to run a marathon before you're ready to do that. And similarly with the retreat, there can be an enormous benefit in doing a retreat. But you have to be ready for it, you have to be motivated for it, and you have to have some really good guidance, I think, to do that. So don't overly rush into that, but maybe maintain it as something you're aiming at, but build the mindfulness sort of skills in a stepwise way and over time before jumping in the deep end like that.
Just like we might build physical fitness before we run a marathon.
Yeah, you want to work up to it.
Yeah, so babies and animals. Right? Some learners were asking, are babies and animals mindful? Are they naturally mindful? And I think there are some things about the way, if we're watching our pets or watching kids, the way that they interact with the world, which has some similarities with mindfulness.
And I think they're great for bringing adults into the present moment.
Yeah. I hear that a lot in courses I teach, don't you? That people take their dog for a walk or play with their kids and suddenly they find that they're just engaging with the world, just through the senses and much more present. Because animals and kids are very present. I mean, they're in the moment in that way. They're very, very present. But I'd say there are some pretty big differences too, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, as a baby, I mean, I was not looking all perplexed. And, when we first form sentences, we don't ask our parents, do you think I'll have enough superannuation by the time I'm 70? And so on. But so that kind of worrying's an adult thing, or something that we develop as we go through childhood and so on. But it's not actually a natural thing. But I think in the maturity of attention that an adult has that perhaps a child doesn't have is for the adult to have the ability to sustain attention more effectively than a child, and also to prioritise attention. For a child, if there's an interesting or colourful bauble somewhere, the attention will go to it, whether the attention needs to go to it or not. Whereas for an adult, we can decide to disregard things, even if they're interesting, when there's something more important. So the ability to distinguish between the important things and not just the colourful or moving things, I think, is a really important part of developing more mature attention.
Yeah, and certainly much more self-awareness, I think you'd argue, in someone practicing mindfulness than in a kid or an animal. Yes,
that's right, yes. There was some discussion too about mindfulness and social anxiety, and because which is a very common thing. I think everybody's got a level of social anxiety to a greater or lesser extent in certain circumstances. And one of the tricky things, I think, is that, and how mindfulness can help, is that very often when we're feeling shy or anxious in a group or perhaps in front of a crowd, is that the attention's actually gone off the people or the situation, off the environment, and it turns inward, so to ourselves and our thinking about ourselves and our thinking about what everybody else thinks about ourselves.
A self-consciousness.
Yeah, and it gets very complicated and gets very confusing and in a kind of a very self-conscious way. So mindfulness can help us to notice that, not to judge it, not to criticise it, but just to be able to notice it, but gently unhook the attention from that and just gently re-engage the attention with where we are or who we're with.
Just with the conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
Feel our feet on the floor, take a few breaths, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because if we're not paying attention to the conversation that's going on around us, we're probably paying attention to a conversation we're having with ourselves about what's everybody thinking about me. Now, mind you, probably most of the people in the group are having the same conversation with themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
So nobody's probably listening at all.
No. And this would also be a very good strategy for people wanting to give a presentation in public, feeling those nerves, just maybe feeling their feet as they walk up to the podium and just focusing on their breath or what they're saying rather than focusing on what they think about it.
Yeah, and just feeling comfortable with the fact that we're a human being having a human experience, and there's a bit of nervousness there, and that's okay. And
I think that's one of the really important parts of mindfulness, to actually just let ourselves be human and really acknowledge what's true. Yeah.
Yes. There was quite a lot of interest in letting go and where it fits in with assertiveness as well.
Yeah, so that's a common question, isn't it? Does letting go mean letting people walk all over me, or allowing bad behaviour or situations to sort of take their course? And no, I don't think it's like that, really, is it? I mean, certainly we might want to let go of expectations that we have about the way people should be, or let go of judgments or reactions that we have to people, and that can sometimes create a bit more openness and more possibility in relationships or in different situations. But I think that the letting go is maybe a necessary first step.
And I think to be able to engage, but without attachment to the feelings or thoughts or worries, to not be so caught up in the situation is very important.
Yes.
Very often letting go means letting go of the impediment to being able to respond when we need to respond, to let go of our fear and say the thing that needs to be said. But hopefully to say it in a mindful way means saying it in a discerning and constructive way.
Yeah. And closely related to that, of course, is acceptance, and sometimes we can accept that people are a particular way or that a situation is a particular way, and other times we need to accept that it's going to take some work to actually change things.
Yes. So I think that whole question raises something that's very interesting, and that is it's easier to interpret letting go as ignoring or getting rid of, where it's not that at all. It means that what's there is there, but not being attached or caught up in it is, I think, a crucial factor.
So we could say letting be. Sometimes it's about letting be, isn't it?
Yeah. I think too with, say, emotions like sadness fear or anger, that letting go in some way, if I was detached, then the emotion wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Trying to let go. And what we mean by letting go in that situation is trying to get rid of the feeling, where if there is sadness, if there is anger, if there is fear, okay, so that feeling is there. So detachment or letting go really means not being attached to it, not fighting, suppressing it.
Yeah.
Which gives us a little bit more latitude to sort of really discern how to respond to it. There was a question too, an interesting question about what's the self. We're getting into big questions now.
It's a big question, isn't it? And an interesting one that often comes up for people who start practicing mindfulness, because if we start to notice that thoughts are coming and going, and situations and moments and feelings in the body, and maybe start to recognise that we're perhaps not necessarily our thoughts or our feelings, then it does beg the question of what are we?
Exactly.
Yeah, which I think is a really interesting one. I mean, what is looking through our eyes right now? What's listening through our ears? What's awake in us? What's conscious from moment to moment is a very important question that I don't think there's actually an answer to that we can necessarily give. I just think it's a very useful inquiry, something to really pay attention to and to just inquire into.
Well, when the mind overthinks that, it certainly gets in the way. And the thinking about what am I, the thinking may actually be part of the obstruction. So, but I think one of the things that mindfulness teaches us is we're not what we think we are.
Yes.
We're not the thinking. We're not the worrying. We're not necessarily the transient emotions, but there may be something in us deeper than that that's behind that, maybe observing that, witnessing it in a very non-judgmental, impartial way. Just perhaps in terms of wrapping up as well, comments about very short attention spans, being conditioned by modern media and so on. I think it's the modern world.
Yes.
Microsoft report suggests 8-second attention span for the average human now, 9 seconds for the goldfish, which might be part of the reason why goldfish tend to be completing university degrees at a lot more higher rate than humans these days.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing more of that, aren't we?
That's right. So anyway, I think we've covered all we've got time to cover for today. And so,
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So once again, really great questions coming up, great conversation happening, and obviously some really good learning coming out of the course. So we'd encourage you to keep doing the exercises, keep contributing to the conversation, and we'll see you next week.